At 0545 on August 20th, 1939, the darkness along the Khalkhin-Gol River exploded. 498 Soviet artillery pieces opened fire simultaneously. Not at dawn, not after reconnaissance. 45 minutes before sunrise, when Japanese sentries could barely see their own hands. Commander Georgy Zhukov had made a decision that violated every convention of warfare. Attack in total darkness. Attack without visual confirmation of targets. Attack when your own troops couldn't see where they were going. His staff had argued against it. His divisional commanders questioned it. Even his political commissar suggested waiting for daylight. Zhukov refused. The barrage lasted exactly 15 minutes. 15 minutes that would determine whether the Soviet Union fought a two-front war in 1941. 15 minutes that would redirect Japanese aggression toward Pearl Harbor instead of Siberia. 15 minutes that changed the Eastern Front before the Eastern Front even existed. But to understand why this moment mattered, we need to go back 3 months. Back to when the world barely noticed a border skirmish in Mongolia. Back to when Stalin's purges had destroyed 75% of the Soviet officer corps. Back to when Japan believed the Red Army was too broken to fight. They were about to discover how catastrophically wrong they were. The conflict began in May of 1939. Japanese and Mongolian forces clashed over a worthless stretch of grassland near the Khalkhin-Gol River. The border itself was disputed. Both sides claimed the territory. Neither side would back down. For Japan, this was a test. The Kwantung Army wanted to probe Soviet defenses. They wanted to see if Stalin's purges had left the Red Army as weak as their intelligence suggested. They committed the 23rd Division, 15,000 men, the best infantry Japan had in Manchuria. For the Soviet Union, this was existential. If Japan broke through here, they could cut the Trans-Siberian Railway. They could threaten Vladivostok. They could force Stalin to divide his armies between Europe and Asia at precisely the moment Hitler was preparing to move west. Moscow sent Georgy Zhukov, 42 years old, son of a shoemaker. A man who had survived Stalin's purges by being too competent to kill. A man who would later save Moscow, break the siege of Leningrad, and lead the final assault on Berlin. But in August of 1939, he was just a corps commander facing his first independent command. The Japanese were winning. By early August, they controlled the east bank of the Khalkhin-Gol. Their position sat on high ground overlooking Soviet forces. They had artillery pre-sighted on every river crossing. They had fortified every hilltop with machine gun nests and mortar positions. Soviet casualties were climbing. 2,000 men in July alone. Every attack across the river ended in slaughter. Every attempt to establish a bridgehead failed. Traditional Soviet doctrine called for massed infantry assaults. Throw enough men at the problem until it broke. But Zhukov saw something his superiors didn't see. The Japanese were counting on traditional Soviet tactics. They were positioned to defeat exactly the kind of attack Moscow kept ordering. So Zhukov stopped attacking. For 2 weeks in early August, Soviet forces went quiet. No probes, no artillery harassment, no reconnaissance in force. The Japanese watched and wondered what was happening. What was happening was concentration. Zhukov was assembling the largest mechanized force the Red Army had ever deployed in combat. 558 tanks, 346 armored cars, 515 aircraft, 498 artillery pieces. He was bringing them forward under cover of darkness, moving them into position in gullies and ravines where Japanese observers couldn't spot them, building up a striking force that outnumbered Japanese forces 3-1. But numbers alone wouldn't win this battle. The Japanese 23rd Division was dug in. They had spent 6 weeks fortifying their positions. They had interlocking fields of fire. They had interior lines of communication. They had prepared for every conventional attack. Zhukov needed surprise. Complete, total, overwhelming surprise. That's why he chose 0545. His staff presented the attack plan on August 18th. The artillery barrage would begin at dawn, 0630. Standard procedure. Give the gunners enough light to adjust fire. Give the infantry enough visibility to advance. Zhukov crossed out 0630 and wrote 0545. His artillery commander protested. The gunners couldn't see their targets in the dark. They'd be firing blind. Half the shells would miss. Zhukov said that was acceptable. The goal wasn't accuracy. The goal was shock. His aviation commander protested. The pilots couldn't fly ground attack missions in darkness. They'd crash into each other. They'd hit friendly forces. Zhukov said the aircraft would attack at 0600, 15 minutes after the barrage began, just as the sky started to gray. The Japanese would still be disoriented, still be scrambling to their positions, still be vulnerable. If you want to see how this pre-dawn gamble played out, hit that like button right now. It helps us share these critical moments in military history with more people who appreciate how single decisions shape entire wars. Subscribe to Orders of History if you haven't already. We're bringing you the moments that textbooks skip. Back to Zhukov's plan. The night of August 19th, Soviet forces moved into final positions. Infantry companies crawled forward through the grassland. Tanks rolled up to within 800 yards of Japanese lines. Artillery batteries completed their targeting calculations based on daytime reconnaissance and maps. No fires, no smoking, no talking. Absolute silence. Japanese sentries heard nothing. At 0530, Zhukov climbed to an observation post on a low hill 2 miles behind the front line. It was completely dark. Stars filled the sky. The temperature had dropped to 45 degrees Fahrenheit. He could see nothing of the battlefield, just darkness. At 0543, he checked his watch, 2 minutes. At 0544, he raised his binoculars. Still nothing visible. At 0545, he gave the order. The horizon turned orange. 498 artillery pieces fired as one. The sound was physical, a pressure wave that compressed the air, a roar that drowned out thought. The shells arced through darkness. Gunners couldn't see where they landed, couldn't adjust fire, couldn't confirm hits. They fired on calculated coordinates, fired on faith, fired because Zhukov ordered it. The Japanese positions erupted. High explosive shells detonated in trenches, on bunkers, in command posts. The Japanese had been sleeping. Their sentries had been scanning empty darkness. Nobody expected an artillery barrage 45 minutes before dawn. Chaos. Officers scrambled for their command posts. Soldiers grabbed weapons and ran toward their fighting positions. Machine gun crews tried to set up in pitch darkness while explosives rained down around them. The barrage walked across Japanese positions in a precise pattern. First, the front line trenches, then the support positions, then the artillery batteries, then the command and control centers. Zhukov had divided the battlefield into a grid. Each artillery battery had been assigned specific grid squares. Fire for 3 minutes on square 1. Shift to square 2. Shift to square 3. Systematic. Methodical. Devastating. At 0600, the sky began to gray. Just enough light for pilots to see. 150 Soviet aircraft appeared from the west, flying low, flying fast. Ground attack aircraft carrying bombs and machine guns. They hit Japanese positions that were still reeling from the artillery barrage. Trenches full of disoriented soldiers. Artillery batteries trying to return fire. Command posts where officers were attempting to restore order. the aircraft made 3 passes, dropped their bombs, strafed with machine guns, then turned back to reload. This was the first mass use of ground attack aircraft in Soviet military history. The first time the Red Air Force had coordinated directly with artillery. The first time they'd attacked in near darkness. It worked. By 06:15, Japanese communications had collapsed, phone lines cut by artillery, radio operators dead or scattered, company commanders unable to reach battalion headquarters, battalion commanders unable to reach division. The Japanese 23rd Division was blind. At 06:20, the artillery barrage stopped. Silence. For 30 seconds, nothing moved. Smoke drifted across the battlefield. Fires burned in collapsed bunkers. Wounded men screamed in Japanese. Then Soviet infantry attacked. 3 rifle divisions, 30,000 men, advancing in extended lines across a 12-mile front. Not the massed charges of old Soviet doctrine. Dispersed units moving fast, bypassing strong points, flowing around resistance. Behind them came the tanks. 558 of them, organized in brigades, operating independently, exploiting gaps, driving deep into Japanese rear areas. This was combined arms warfare. Artillery, aviation, infantry, and armor working together. It was how the Red Army would fight in 1944 and 1945. How they would drive from Stalingrad to Berlin. But in August 1939, it was revolutionary. The Japanese couldn't respond. Their defensive plan required coordination, required interlocking fields of fire, required artillery support and reserves. All of that was gone. By 0700, Soviet forces had crossed the Khalkhin-Gol River at 6 points. By 0800, they'd established bridgeheads 3 miles deep. By 0900, tanks were operating in Japanese rear areas, overrunning supply depots, capturing artillery positions, cutting retreat routes. The Japanese 23rd Division began to disintegrate. Not retreat, disintegration. Companies lost contact with battalions. Battalions lost contact with regiment. Regiment lost contact with division headquarters. Units fought independently, surrounded, cut off, destroyed piecemeal. By noon on August 20th, the battle was effectively over. The 23rd Division had ceased to exist as a fighting force. Of its 15,000 men, 12,000 were dead, wounded, or captured. Soviet casualties were approximately 9,000. Heavy, but acceptable against the complete destruction of an enemy division. But the real impact wasn't measured in casualties. Tokyo received reports of the disaster on August 21st. The General Staff convened emergency meetings. They'd lost their best division in Manchuria. Lost it in less than 12 hours. Lost it to an army they'd believed was broken by purges. They'd been testing Soviet strength. The test had failed catastrophically. Japan faced a choice: double down in Mongolia, commit more divisions, try to defeat Zhukov's forces before winter, or accept defeat. Sign a ceasefire, redirect strategy elsewhere. They chose elsewhere. On September 15, 1939, Japan and the Soviet Union signed a ceasefire agreement. All Japanese forces would withdraw from disputed territory. All Soviet forces would hold their positions. The border war was over, but the strategic consequences were just beginning. Japanese military planners began reassessing their options. They'd wanted to expand north, seize Soviet territory in Siberia, cut the Trans-Siberian Railway, isolate the Soviet Far East. Khalkhin-Gol proved that strategy was suicide. The Red Army was stronger than Japanese intelligence had believed. Soviet mechanized forces were formidable. Soviet combined arms doctrine was effective. Going north meant war with the Soviet Union, a war Japan couldn't win. So they looked south instead, Southeast Asia, the Dutch East Indies, French Indochina, British Malaya, American Philippines. Resources Japan needed: oil, rubber, rice, metals. Territories defended by colonial powers weakened by war in Europe. That strategic pivot led directly to Pearl Harbor, directly to the Pacific War, directly to Hiroshima, and it started with Zhukov's decision to attack at 0545 instead of 0630. 45 minutes of darkness that changed everything. For Stalin, Khalkhin-Gol was a revelation. The purges had destroyed his officer corps. But one commander had survived. One commander had demonstrated brilliance. One commander had just saved the Eastern Front. Zhukov's career accelerated. In 1940, he became Chief of the General Staff. In 1941, he saved Moscow. In 1942 and 1943, he orchestrated Stalingrad. In 1944 and 1945, he led the drive to Berlin. None of that happens if the 23rd Division destroys Soviet forces at Khalkhin-Gol. None of that happens if Japan commits to northern expansion. None of that happens if Zhukov attacks at dawn like everyone expected. The pre-dawn barrage proved something else. Something Stalin's purges had nearly destroyed. Soviet officers could think independently, could innovate, could win through planning and surprise instead of just throwing bodies at problems. Khalkhin-Gol became a laboratory. The tactics worked there became doctrine. Combined arms, massed armor, artillery preparation, close air support, deep operations into enemy rear areas. German intelligence officers studied the battle. They noted Soviet capabilities. They warned that the Red Army was modernizing. Their warnings were ignored. Hitler invaded in June 1941, expecting to face the army of 1937, the army of the purges, the army that was supposedly broken. He faced the army of Khalkhin-Gol instead. The rest is history. History that starts at 0545 on August 20th, 1939. History that starts with 498 artillery pieces firing into darkness. History that starts with one commander's willingness to violate doctrine and attack when no one could see. Did you know that Khalkhin-Gol directly influenced Japan's decision to attack Pearl Harbor instead of invading Siberia? Share this story with someone who appreciates how single moments redirect entire wars. Subscribe to Orders of History and turn on notifications so you never miss these forgotten pivots that shaped our world. Drop a comment right now. Where are you watching from? And did you know about this battle before today? The battlefield at Khalkhin-Gol is still there. Still empty grassland along a river in Mongolia. There's a small memorial, a few rusted tank holes. Nothing that suggests what happened there changed the war before the war even started. But it did. At 0545, in total darkness, Georgy Zhukov made a decision that saved the Soviet Union from a two-front war. A decision that redirected Japanese aggression toward the Pacific. A decision that demonstrated combined arms warfare 2 years before the Wehrmacht made it famous. One artillery barrage, 45 minutes of darkness. Everything changed.